with the Black Alliance for Peace. Our delegation went to the Caribbean coast and visited Bluefields and Pearl Lagoon and Copper Hill. Upon coming into the country, we were actually, before we even went to visit, before the election day actually happened, we were actually able to see the cynical, through the media, the cynical and obscene attempts of the U.S. government to preempt the validity of our testimony of what we've seen here. The U.S. silence about the violence and repression in places like Honduras and Haiti speaks louder than the lies they speak about Nicaragua. The Biden administration lies about Nicaragua elections have no basis in reality. Nicaragua policy, U.S. policy toward Nicaragua is connected to their policy against Cuba and in Haiti and Venezuela and Colombia. U.S. political prisoners, they talk about political prisoners or people being prevented from participating as candidates in the process, when this is completely untrue, and the U.S. holds political prisoners, some of the longest held political prisoners on the planet, who are now dying in prison. We saw firsthand the vibrance, freedom, and fairness of the process on the Caribbean coast. Indigenous and black people went to the polls in a humble and orderly fashion. Their gains, they spoke of their gains since 2007, when the Sandinistas came to power, and that what they are trying to ensure through their process of autonomy is the continuation of their projects of infrastructure for water, electricity, roads, education, healthcare. Nothing that is comparable to what their experience is, nothing comparable to what we have in the United States, where the U.S. haggles over the price tag of providing these things for all of its citizens, human rights for its citizens. Most of all the people on the Caribbean coast and Bluefields and other places expressed their faith in their government because of the fact that it provides agency of them. Not things being given to them, but that they actually enjoy an autonomy that's statutory, that's enshrined in the law, and also is behind how they carry out the election process in those regions. The black power that we fight for in the United States, they are realizing through autonomy. Autonomy is black power, and they say is ensured through the Sandinista revolution. The U.S. policies are based on racism, the outrageous assumption that the U.S. has the right to determine the leadership of other nations when it can't even provide basic human rights to its own citizens and residents is obscene. We're here because we are anti-imperialist internationalists opposing the common global system of oppression. Thank you.
Now we have MB Grimes from Friends of ATC.
Good afternoon. My name is MB Grimes, and I'm here representing Friends of the ATC, which is a solidarity network that supports the work of the Asociación de los Trabajadores del Campo, or the Rural Workers Association here in Nicaragua. I've been interning here for Friends of the ATC for the past 2 months, learning the reality of the lives of Nicaraguans here leading up to the elections. And our group, we had 12 members from North America, as well as members from countries in Honduras, in Panama, Dominican Republic, and Venezuela, representing Bloc Via Campesina, that makes up the international peasant movement. We had the privilege of visiting Grenada, and here we visited 4 voting centers. We were warmly greeted at each center, invited to openly observe and freely take pictures, asking questions. What surprised me the most was the level of tranquility I felt at each center, a stark contrast to what I've experienced in the United States. Everyone was relaxed and willing to chat for as long as we had time for there. Not only was the process efficient, but it was transparent, and I felt like the Nicaraguan workers genuinely wanted to show us every step of the process to change the narrative that exists in mainstream media about the elections in Nicaragua. As a young adult observing these elections, I felt a strong presence of youth at the voting centers, which is absolutely critical of moving forward for the future of Nicaragua. The entire process was smooth, and I feel grateful to have experienced this opportunity, something I never feel like I will experience in the United States, which is a sad reality. But I would like to genuinely thank the people of Nicaragua. These past 2 months I've experienced the kindness, the generosity of the people of this country, and I continue to experience this throughout this week. And I would also like to thank the Supreme Electoral Council for organizing this week's activities, and I can say on behalf of my group that we all had a very strong, profound, and impactful experience here this week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, I present Paul Pumphrey from Friends of the Congo.
Hello.
Okay. My name is Paul Pumphrey, and I am on the board of Friends of the Congo, which I've had the opportunity of observing elections in the Congo, as well as in Haiti. And I'm happy to have had the opportunity to do the same here in Nicaragua. One of our biggest concerns is that when the President of the United States makes a statement that elections aren't free and fair here in Nicaragua, I can only think of how many states since the last election took place in the United States that they have changed the election laws, making it more difficult, especially for people of color, to vote in the United States. And yet, when I'm here and I'm talking to people even from the opposition party, one of the things they constantly said was that any type of embargo hurts all the people here in Nicaragua, and that they were opposed to the United States suggesting embargoes against the people of Nicaragua. And the people of the United States need to be clear that we need to clean the act up for voting participation in the United States before we start throwing eggs at other people's countries. Here in Nicaragua, I saw a free and fair election. I talked to many people who were not a part of the Sandinistas party, and yet they themselves said they were willing to accept whatever result happened in the election. And I would hope that the people of the United States demand that its government follow suit with the people here in Nicaragua and accept whatever results comes from this election. Thank you.
Now I have Dr. Timothy Bood from the delegation of the Anti-Imperialist Workers Platform.
Okay, just to correct that, I actually I am here with the Code Pink delegation. I'm a physician in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I've worked as an election observer in 6 different countries, including El Salvador, Honduras, Haiti, and Colombia, and Venezuela. Our group traveled to the Department of Chontales in the southeast of the country, and we witnessed a high level of participation in the voting. There were long lineups of people early in the morning waiting to vote, and it certainly was in keeping with the 65% voter turnout that has been reported here, which is, and the opposite figures that are in the mass media in the United States are completely false, and I think we need to make that completely clear. We spoke with opposition members as well in the voting centers. None of the opposition party members that we spoke to had any complaints to make about the process. And I think I should also address my own experience with having been banned from Facebook for 3 days. I was commenting on a website called Confidencial, in which they stated that the Sandinista Party had troll farms and such to spread disinformation. I think it's important to state that it's completely false. And in fact, the extreme irony of the situation is that the United States employs troll farms throughout the world to influence elections and to overthrow governments, such as the attempt to overthrow the government of Nicaragua in 2018. And they continue to use these troll farms here to attempt to influence the election. So, as an election observer, I felt compelled to speak out and to denounce the American-U.S. Interference in the electoral process of Nicaragua, and for that, I was banned.
Thank you. Next, we have Craig Pasta Jardula, who is a journalist based in the United States.
Thank you very much. First off, I'd like to thank the delegations that came out to do such great work here. Work nonstop, the foreign ministry, they gave us access to everything. But more importantly, the people of Nicaragua who opened up this process to us. It was really, really important. And it's not just important for the people of Nicaragua, but it's also important for people of the world. Because for any democracy to thrive, we must have fair, transparent, trackable, and verifiable elections. It's uber important. And I'm not going to harp too much on any type of politics, but I want to concentrate on the process itself. I didn't really care who was on the ballot. All I cared about was the framework and the process of which we saw to see that it was a fair, transparent election. And every step of the way here in Nicaragua, that's exactly what we got. From the registration process down to the fluidity of the voting process. We, in fact, clocked a voter who got in and out in 8 minutes and 43 seconds. And that was a long time, in fact. Could you imagine in America, which we saw in California with the California primaries, people waiting 5, 6, 7, 8 hours just to vote? We didn't see that in Nicaragua. And everything was great even down to the tabulation process, where we had multiple parties in the room to assure integrity. The whole step of the way, which was great. But mainly I want to talk about the process, meaning the chain of custody, because that's something that we really saw that was great here in Nicaragua. It made this election a home run. The chain of custody is very strong here, including the fact that in Nicaragua we have something that is awesome that a lot of countries need to adopt, which is where the vote is cast, it is counted. That assures a strong chain of custody. And regardless that we heard a lot of misinformation when it came to parties being jailed and not being able to run on the ballot, which was so untrue. We understand that a lot of these parties received money from NGOs and they didn't want to declare where they got their money from. We saw one of the cleanest processes here in Nicaragua. It was definitely a home run. So I'm just going to keep it short and simple and talk about the fact that Nicaragua has a great chain of custody. And a lot of countries need to look at that and adopt that, because that's what made this election right here in Nicaragua a home run. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Rick Cohn from Friends of Latin America.
Hello? Yes. I just wanted to add that it is incredible to me. I've analyzed elections in the United States, nowhere else, but I always try to do some statistics, and I find that the number, because they count the ballots by optical scanner, it doesn't often give good results. If you look at it by precinct, a lot of the times more people or fewer people actually sign up, come in to vote, than they have votes. Now, how can you imagine, in a polling station or a precinct, if 800 people sign in to vote and they get 1,000 votes? That happens in the United States, and we can see that. And they don't investigate it; they just use the scanner. So these things are broken. We saw one where more people voted in one polling district. More people voted in PG County than were registered voters in the entire polling place. So they had about 50% more, and they all voted for Hillary Clinton except 2 people. Okay, it's very strange. So that could not happen here. You can't, because of that chain of command, as he said, it would be absolutely impossible for the number of people showing up to vote to not equal the number of votes cast, because they count the ballots before and after. They keep track of that information at each and every precinct. So that is totally taken care of, and and it's counted by hand with paper ballots. It is absolutely secure, absolutely, and it's amazingly secure. I have never seen an election that I have analyzed that looks as tight as this one. So I wanted to speak just a little bit, though. A group of 11 of us went to Bilwi on the Caribbean coast. And in the United States, one of the things they'll use to say this election is fake is that, a high percentage of people voted, and a high percentage of people voted for the FSLN. And that can't happen, because American politicians, that would never happen. So I wanted to say something about why the voters told us they were voting. They told us that basically they had 2 Category 4 and Category 5 hurricanes last year, and the government came and saved their lives, saved many, many lives. And people have trust in that government. And then the government came and it made sure the electric was on. In Puerto Rico, from a year earlier, electric still isn't working, because they are making money selling electric, but it still doesn't work. The voters, they helped. They told us they had new roofs put on almost immediately when they were delivered. They told us that the schools were rebuilt. All of the schools were in good condition. All of the schools, and some of them had new buildings. So we had a situation where they were very happy with the performance of the government. And that is why, they also told us they had 1 kilometer of road before the FSLN came into power from the neoliberal period. Now they have 500 kilometers, and with 70 more kilometers, they'll be able to drive from all the way to Managua, which they have never been able to do in history. So they told us these things, and the FSLN party received the highest percentage of votes. But that's not strange, because they really support the government. They received 86.7% of the vote. But it's, there's no way that's made up. That's not fake. It's where they're at. Thank you.
Thank you. And for a concluding statement, we have Roger Harris from Task Force on the Americas.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. And thank you for everybody for coming out and listening to this important program. But thank you, most importantly, to our Nicaraguan hosts and to the Nicaraguan people for making this a profound experience. Cumulatively, we were 232 internationals here, including international press and journalists. We came as companies to this election. We represented 27 countries, and we visited over 25 voting centers. And we listened to the Nicaraguan people, and what we heard was that this election was a celebration of democracy. We heard that everywhere. We heard them in every one of those 25 voting centers, that this was a celebration of democracy, contrary to what our president, that is my president, Joseph Biden has said, what the sycophantic allies of the United States say, and what the sycophantic press has to say. This is not only a celebration of democracy, but we were told time and again that it was a celebration of peace and national unity. And this has to be understood in the context of the events of 2018, when this country experienced a US-instigated coup attempt to overthrow the democratically elected government. And the people constantly came up to us and they said, we are so proud that this election is peaceful, tranquil, and calm. And we appreciate that you have come to see this and to tell the world that that is what the true Nicaragua is. And this was a celebration, above all, of sovereignty. This was called Elections 2021 Sovereign Elections. And when they say sovereignty, that means sovereignty from the imperial power to the north. On the same day that the Nicaraguan people made their celebration of democracy, US President Joseph Biden called this a sham election. 3 days before, the United States lavished Saudi Arabia with a $650 arms gift sale. Saudi Arabia doesn't even bother having elections. That's how hypocritical the United States is. The United States talked about these so-called pre-candidates, the 7 so-called pre-candidates. I can assure you from what we've heard on the ground here that these so-called 7 pre-candidates had more support inside the Washington Beltway than they had here in Nicaragua. The United States claims to support democracy, but in fact, the United States has never supported democracy in Nicaragua. In 1912, the U.S. Marines occupied this country, and they didn't leave until a dictatorship was set up to do the bidding of the imperial power. Joseph Biden had the nerve in his statement of November 7th to say that the government here is just like the Somoza dictatorship. But if it were just like the Somoza dictatorship, the United States would be supporting Nicaragua rather than trying to overthrow it. History tells us that the United States supported and nurtured the Somoza dictatorship. And then when the dictatorship was overthrown by the Nicaraguan people led by the Sandinista revolution, the United States funded the former Sandinista National Guard in the form of the Contras. And the United States has forever been trying to overthrow Nicaragua. And that is why they call this a sham election, because it is the will of the people that have been spoken, but the United States wants to overthrow that in a regime change program. So we demand, us internationals, that we recognize the sovereignty of Nicaragua, recognize the elections, and to end all unilateral coercive measures against the Nicaraguan people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the international delegates for speaking on the panel here today and giving your statements. We're now going to take a time to take questions from the audience. There are already some questions coming in on the Zoom. Again, if you would like to ask a question, please do type it into the chat on Zoom. We are monitoring, and if you are here in the room, raise your hand. Welcome. Yeah, go ahead.
Está bien si yo hago la pregunta en inglés y yeah, okay. I'll use my phone so I can record myself. Camila Escalante, Calscashua News, based in Bolivia. So we have a collection of people here from Canada and the United States. And today, Luis Almagro tweeted that the OAS has their own report, despite that the Organization of American States was not here on the ground. We didn't see them here. They don't know what was going on. But they actually, they said that this is, they're asking for a response to this clear violation of the Democratic Charter, referring to the electoral process that took place on Sunday. This is a report about strengthening democracy in Nicaragua despite their lack of presence, and they call for and demand the annulment of the elections and the holding of a new electoral process. We've heard this before. They say with, quote, guarantees of electoral observation and true electoral competition. So everyone here, unless you're from Cuba or from Venezuela, is part of a country that is a part of the Organization of American States. So what can we do? What can some of you guys do? What do you think we can do going forward, given that we're represented within that body that continues to be interventionist, and where I live carried out a coup exactly 2 years ago in Bolivia and has also interfered in the internal affairs of Cuba, Venezuela, and many other countries? I want to ask at least someone from the U.S. It'd be great to hear from someone from Canada as well. Nedfa, if you would.
I think it's a very good question. I think it's actually an important question. I think that we first have to realize the short answer to your question is that we have to build an anti-imperialist united front that's global. The OAS, the Organization of American States, has lost its own legitimacy a long time ago, if it ever even had any. And so, like you said, you pointed out, it blatantly supported a coup in Bolivia, and now it's attempting to discredit a process of free and fair itself is discredited. I think what has to happen is that we have to build an anti-imperialist front that only recognizes legitimate popular human rights or people-centered human rights processes. And I think that also goes for looking internally to the United States, where the United States pulls the strings in the OAS, Managua and all them, they really carry the water of US imperialism. And so when we look to also expose the blatant contradictions and hypocrisy that U.S. domestic policy has, its connection with the foreign policy that it has, then I think that's the beginning of us building an anti-imperialist united front, and that's essential, and it also means that we have to look for processes of power. You know, we have to build power on the local level. There's places that don't hold state power, where the people don't hold state power. It's still in the hands of an elite, like for example Haiti. If we look at the stark contradictions in Haiti, where they supported dictator Jovenel Moïse, in spite of all of these mass demonstrations against Jovenel Moïse, they funded the police there, they funded repression, and even now, after his assassination, they were trying to legitimize people just kind of assuming themselves in power, actually picking the next person in power. So there's a lot of hypocrisy there that the United States has, and the Organization of American States reflects that same hypocrisy.
Yeah, and just a follow-up, if I could hear from one of the, I know there are fewer people from Canada, but Canada is a member of the Organization of American States and was also at the front of the Lima cartel, which tried to overthrow the democratic constitutional Bolivarian government of Venezuela.
I can go first, Tim. I would say that I think that everything that we observed in the election process on Sunday is in complete contradiction to what has been said by the lackeys in the Organization of American States, which does include the government of right-wing countries across Latin America. We can see that there is a necessity for us as people from the United States and Canada to call on our countries where we live to recognize the results of the election here in Nicaragua, to really organize as people across the border to build a movement in solidarity with the voice of the people of Nicaragua, their self-determination, their independence, and their sovereignty, which we saw and observed as being expressed on Sunday, November 7th, during the elections. There is nothing that we saw on the streets that shows that these elections were any sort of a clear violation of the Democratic Charter, and absolutely no reason to call for an annulment of these elections, in which we observed with our own eyes the Nicaraguan people in an atmosphere of tranquility, of celebration, voted for expressed their sovereign right to vote, and really stood together and voted in the government which they wanted to see, despite knowing that this voting in Daniel Ortega and an FSLN government again could mean and would mean increasing pressure from the governments of the United States and Canada on the country of Nicaragua. So I think that from here and going forward from this important and historic election, we all have the responsibility as people from Canada and the United States to build a stronger movement in solidarity with the sovereignty, self-determination, and independence of Nicaragua.
I believe it's very important. I believe it's very important that people who are citizens of the United States, really take a look at what has gone on in the United States since the 2020 election. Count how many states have passed laws to make it more difficult for the citizens of the United States to vote and have their vote counted. And then ask, how can the head of the United States have the audacity to talk about anybody else's election without first addressing the contradiction of the democratic process or the lack of the democratic process inside the United States itself? As I said earlier, I observed elections in Haiti, And year after year of observations, I watched how the United States undermined the election. And when they didn't like it, they then put the troops in and replaced the head of state. It is clear for people in the United States to pay attention to how our tax dollars are being used to fight democratic processes, not only outside the United States, but inside the United States as well. And that if we truly believe in democracy, then we really need to then play a more active role in demanding democracy at home before we run around trying to make accusations, false accusations against other countries.
Would anyone else like to address the subject?
I just wanted to say that I agree the OAS is completely discredited, especially with their role in the coup in Bolivia not too long ago. That I think proved it to everyone what their purpose is, their role is. And I think the Canadian government, well, it's an embarrassment to Canadians everywhere. The Canadian government acts as an errand boy for the United States. The Canadian government has no problem whatsoever with the narco dictatorships of Honduras or Colombia. But when it comes to a free and sovereign country like Nicaragua that wants to use its natural resources for the benefit of all Nicaraguans, well, we can't have that, can we? So what we need to do is confront the disinformation at every opportunity, and we need to form a coalition to oppose the imperialism of the United States.
I just want to piggyback on that and say absolutely. We just have to get some recognition going, realizing who the OAS is, educate people who they are. We call groups like the OAS and the NED the CIA light. We understand who they are. They're not about democracy and securing fair elections. They're all about resource extraction and then putting in austerity measures on the peoples of these countries in Latin America. So we can only hope that countries like Nicaragua and Venezuela and other neighboring countries say no more, get out, we're no longer going to play ball. And when that does happen, then we, us in this room over here, the delegations, the people, the journalists, we have to pick up the slack. We have to form an alliance and make sure that we are constantly educating, monitoring, and making sure the world knows where places like Nicaragua are having free, fair elections and tell the people about it.
Thank you. We actually do have another question I would like to address. Online, there is someone wondering if we observed any evidence of U.S. meddling in the election, or what did we observe about U.S. or Canadian meddling in the election?
In the run-up of the election, the United States passed the Renacer Act, the RENACER Act. This act was a direct violation of the national sovereignty of Nicaragua. It was a warning, a shot across the bow to the Nicaraguan people that if they voted their choice rather than Joe Biden's choice, they would be punished. And it's the responsibility of us, that internationals, to get the boot of the United States off the back of Nicaragua.
I wanted to add that corporate media like Facebook, well, all of the corporate media, but including Facebook and Twitter, the social media are actually just part of the U.S. system.
Absolutely.
And they're contractors, and they're working, providing information back and forth. They're actually an aspect of the government, and they closed thousands of sites, of people's accounts who were people, and I met some of them. They're actual people, and they closed their accounts, and they weren't, anyone who was saying anything other than the fact that they may have been supporting the Nicaraguan people or opposed to the sanctions on Nicaragua. So they highly manipulated the media, and they worked with obviously the mainstream media. I never saw any of the major mainstream media here. All the places we went, And I don't see that they say they're reporting from here. So they know nothing. All they know is what they get from the CIA and the USAID and NED. Those are their only sources, and their information is just manufactured. And in fact, I wanted to say something about how quickly the OAS could come to their judgment. You know, they must have met, right? They must have discussed this deeply before coming to this crazy conclusion. And how much time did they have to do that? The same with the United States. They had declared the election fraudulent before anybody even voted. Okay? And we're saying, oh man, we're so slow in responding because we actually waited till the election occurred before we decided to tell you if it was free and fair or not. And they already had decided, had it all finished. They wrote these things weeks and months ago. Okay? So they're a bit more polished than we are because we were, you know, putting this together last minute because the election, the results have just come in. So yes, it's completely cooperating with the media. So if there was censorship, and it is a problem, and it is certainly the biggest deficiency in democracy in Nicaragua is the interference. That there is so much interference from the U.S. government and the media, and the censorship and the lies that they tell. That's the interference that's occurring in this election. But the Nicaraguan people overcame it, which I really want to know how you do that, because we need to do that in the United
I agree with everything everybody said. I think it's important for us to know. I'm sorry. It's important for us to realize what the United States does in terms of its propaganda is not targeting the Nicaraguan people. They already know. They read the polls just like us and all that. So their attempts in the media to discredit it before it even happens is targeting outside, particularly the U.S. public. It's to get support for their programs of so-called quote-unquote regime change, or the change of governments. So it's incumbent upon those of us who are anti-imperialists outside of Nicaragua to recognize the reality, to not see through the lies, and also to do our work in exposing the United States government, not just the United States, because we're also talking about the OAS and all, NATO. All of these institutions are really nothing but the pan-European capitalist patriarchy. They're the US, EU, NATO axis of domination. That's what the OAS is, and it's part of that. And so we have to realize that this stuff is not, they already know that the Sandinista people, and the FSLN, like one of the young people told me, it's not just a party. They said the U.S. doesn't realize we're a social movement. And so they know they can't do anything against that. But what they're trying to do is intoxicate our thinking and trying to make people on the ground already have judgments about what the kind of things that we're expressing here today.
Thank you very much. I've heard there's we're good? Okay. So the next question we've actually gotten is if, first I would say that the government of the UK has probably expectedly joined with the governments of the US and Canada in condemning these elections as not legitimate. So there are people in the chat that wanted to express that, and also are looking for comment on whether anything that we've seen or we've heard from people in Nicaragua, because again, we really want to be explaining and telling people what we saw and what we observed and how people in Nicaragua that were voters responded to our questions. Do we think there's any chance or any plans for an OAS or a US coup attempt here in Nicaragua?
I can at least say that.
I'm sorry, I don't want to be talking too much, but I mean, they've done that. A lot of people may not. Some of us here, we keep up with it. We've even reported on it, things like that. So in 2018, they already attempted to coup, and this is part of the U.S. playbook. Is to find what are the delinquent force of the people, the citizens of a country, and co-opt them, either pay them or whatever to create destabilizing attempts. And these things are violent, viciously violent attempts that are cast in the media as if there's some legitimate uprising against a dictatorial government. So they've done that already. We can always expect that they will do that. If they will drop bombs on innocent babies anywhere in the world, that means they're committed to full spectrum dominance by any means necessary. So we have to be committed to decolonization, anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism, and I'll just say this directed to indigenous and black people. One of the things they're trying to make us believe, because it's hard for us to say we trying to convince our government. I'm talking about, people like in my organizations that are part of the Black Alliance for Peace. This is not our government. We are subjects, we're colonized victims of their violence inside the United States. We're not trying to convince them of nothing. We're fighting for decolonization and liberation against these global imperialist pigs, and that's what we're struggling for. So, one, we don't put anything past them. They're going to do whatever they can do. They're going to continue to do it until their last breath, and so we have to be just as determined to get our liberation and our freedom.
That's right.
Yeah, on the question of another coup attempt, the official policy of the United States is regime change here. And they tried to instigate a coup in 2018 that failed. And I think the Nicaraguan people are realizing that national unity is more important and peace and calm is more important. At least that's what we heard in these days here in Nicaragua. But the United States is not going to give up. It's no longer politically fashionable to land the Marines. But there are other ways of waging war, and that's called hybrid warfare. And the United States is bringing in, is imposing an embargo, a blockade onto Nicaragua with the increased unilateral, illegal, coercive sanctions. And this type of hybrid warfare, make no doubt about it, is more deadly than war. It kills as effectively as bombs, and it prevents what we have seen on the ground here about how beautiful this country is, and how wonderful these people are, and how much more they could do if the United States would allow them to be sovereign.
I would like to say is for the people of the United States, which I am one of them, is that we really must understand when we watch the news and they talk about how many migrants are coming up to the southern border. Look at the history. They came up from El Salvador after the United States was heavily involved in a war against the people of El Salvador. They came up from Honduras after President Obama refused to call a military coup in Honduras a military coup. So U.S. foreign policy has created the problem at the border of the United States and Mexico.
That's right.
And now they kind of create another problem at the border of the United States and Mexico if President Biden goes on with what he's attempting to do and undermining the democratic process here in Nicaragua. So we need to be very clear, because U.S. foreign policy has a great deal to do with people leaving their homes. As I've said to many friends of mine, do you really believe people left their homes because they want to see snow? I mean, let's face the facts. Are you going to leave your family or even send your children thousands of miles away from home unless you feel your family is threatened? Your children are forced to be in a gang. That because your parents may be a labor leader, that his life and his family life is being threatened. This is the reality of what's going on here in Central America. And it's U.S. tax dollars and U.S. corporate interests and U.S. corporate greed that's creating this nightmare for the people of Central America. And it's high time that those of us living in the United States open up our eyes and see that the real problem here in Central America starts with the U.S. government and U.S. corporations. And until we stand up and practice democracy, let me repeat that. until the people of the United States stand up and practice democracy and demand, the same way we did when we demanded the United States get out of South Africa. There is another move right now that needs to happen. We need to say that the United States government and U.S. corporations need to get their hands off of the people of Central America and South America and stop the greed and the robbing and the killing.
Yeah.
So we're going to take one final question before we conclude our press conference of North Americans speaking about our experience as election accompaniers during the elections on November 7th. The question is, if we could please address Sunday night's statement from the White House on the election. A statement that was similarly echoed by the Foreign Ministry of Canada, and if anyone could please address Sunday night's statement from the White House and Joe Biden about the illegitimacy of the elections here in Nicaragua.
Let me say one thing. One thing I would like to say in reference to that is either the President of the United States is clairvoyant or he's a liar. Simple. Because how did he know what was going to happen during the election before he even actually had the evidence to make the statement that he made? And I've seen so many people, because they were upset with the Trump administration, go from Twilly-dee to Twilly-dum and believe that, well, since Trump is so bad, Biden has to be better. And I say, no, he's not. Because he's just as bad and even more dangerous, because so many people in the United States think that since he's not Trump, that we have a better government. All I simply say is look at the facts. Look at what's going on the ground in the United States. Look at how many states are changing the election laws. Look at how the military budget is still growing. And for what? We just got through spending over $2.5 trillion in Afghanistan. And the question needs to be asked, for what? United States was in Afghanistan for 20 years. And guess what? During that 20 years, the highest exporter of heroin to the United States was Afghanistan. How did that happen? When the U.S. government military claimed they were in charge, unless they were part of the drug trade. We know when the war happened here in Nicaragua, and it got rid of the Somoza regime, cocaine started flowing into the United States to supply money for buying arms for the Contras. There's a real connection between many of the problems we have in the United States and U.S. foreign policy. And we need to learn to connect the dots. We need to learn to connect the dots and learn from the mistakes and the criminal acts that our government has been doing against the people of Central America.
He alleges that there was some sort of fraud in the election, and yet we saw that this is a system with over 300,000 people involved, working this system with all of the parties always keeping an eye on everything. There is absolutely, it's an amazing system. It's not a system like the United States where you put it in a machine and it gives you a number, and then you don't even verify if that number is even logically consistent with the other numbers that you have. It's not that system. It would be absolutely impossible to do any sort of election fraud in this system. And we saw that. It is an amazing system, and it should be studied, and it should be used more often. So the entire basis of the Biden administration statement, which was written before the election actually even occurred, is complete rubbish. This is the most democratic, the most transparent election I have ever seen in my lifetime.
Thank you. As a conclusion, we actually just got one more question from Canada regarding what we have observed as the Nicaraguan people's reaction to this election and the victory of the Sandinista Party and Daniel Ortega, which we've observed in the last 2 days.
Celebration. Celebration that democracy does work.
No, I think it's been a beautiful opportunity to experience. I think most of us were all together last night in celebration at the palace, and seeing the amount of support from the youth in particular really stood out to me. Seeing the way they support the government, and like I said, I've been here 2 months, and a lot of my time has been spent with the people of Nicaragua, and I've had an overwhelmingly immense feelings of support from the people here, and I've experienced firsthand the positive impacts and benefits from the FSLN on the people here in Nicaragua, and I know that the reflection of that is going to be echoed as we move forward and Daniel Ortega continues to take power.
I will say also that reaction was quite immediate. As we were driving around the city of Managua the night of the election after the results had been announced, we already saw people gathering to celebrate the victory. They were spontaneous, they were expressing themselves in their sovereign will, and it was very apparent in the streets of Nicaragua that there was a peaceful yet celebratory really air to the city that night, and it continued well into the morning with fireworks, and we woke up the next day to a city that had been through an election for actually president, the National Assembly, the Central American Parliament as well, and the vice president, but a city that continued to be calm and functioning and really just going about their business of building their country of Nicaragua with the government that they chose with their sovereign will. As we close the press conference tonight, unless anyone has anything final they would like to add, we say as people from Canada and the United States that we will remain committed to building a movement in solidarity with the people of Nicaragua and their democratically elected government against any form of US or Canada intervention in the country, especially in the form of deadly sanctions, and that we commit to starting that work from today. Here at this press conference, we represent a wide breadth of organizations, backgrounds, and people across the US and Canada, and we will continue our work together from this point. There's absolutely no doubt that the results of the elections reflect the will of the people of Nicaragua, and we demand that the governments of the US and Canada recognize these democratic elections, which we have seen with our own eyes. Thank you again for everyone joining. Thank you for all participants, all for joining today, and all the journalists, and we will talk to you soon.